Considering the levels of organization that are relevant to the human body, we want to start with the chemical level of organization, which would be the lowest or simplest level from which everything else is composed. Besides water, most of the molecules that we'll be considering would fall into a group called organic molecules. Now, what makes a molecule organic is that it contains carbon. The word organic gets used quite a bit in popular usage in terms of organic produce, for instance, or organic groceries. Organic in that sense is meaningless as far as we're concerned. It's just a marketing label that's been applied to food. Organic means that it has carbon in it. Now, a simple example of an organic molecule would be this ethane molecule represented. It has 2 carbons and everything else is a hydrogen, giving us the molecule's formula C2H6. The name ethane actually refers to the fact that it's 2 carbons in a hydrocarbon molecule. If we increase a number of carbons, we just change the name, and if there are 8 carbons, then we have octane. I use octane as an example because it's something that you've probably heard of associated with gasoline. Gasoline is really just a fluid mixture of hydrocarbons of differing lengths, and octane is a rating of gasoline depending on exactly how much is in there, based on a rather complicated formula that we're not going to go into right now. But octane is a small, lightweight hydrocarbon with quite a bit of energy in it that can be burned off to help drive your car or something like that. Now, what I've drawn here, the ethane and the octane molecules that I've drawn in here, are this sort of laborious representation, drawing every C for the carbon atoms and every H for the hydrogen atoms. The lines represent a covalent bond between them, a pair of electrons that's shared. Remember, the outer shell of any atom, the valence shell that needs to be filled, needs to have 8 electrons, except for the case of hydrogen. So 4 lines extending out from a carbon represents that it has 8 electrons in its outer shell. Remember that carbon from the HONC, H-O-N-C, mnemonic that I showed you earlier, can make 4 bonds. Drawing out all these C's and H's in the lines gets a little bit tiresome to draw out. So for organic molecules, we have a shorthand that we use quite a bit, which is we draw lines representing the bonds, and where they come together and make an angle is where there's an atom. If we don't write anything else in, if we don't put a letter representing what atom is at that joining of 2 lines, we assume that it's a carbon. If we do write something in, then we'll put an O or an N or an S or whatever for the element that's found at that particular location in the molecule. Hydrogens, however, since there's so many of them, are basically ignored. So, the zigzag line underneath octane, which I like to think of as looking like Charlie Brown's shirt or something like that, is just another representation of that same molecule. You can see that there are 7 lines there representing the bonds between the 8 carbons. And then each line represents 1 bond. We would assume that a carbon has to be filled with 4 bonds, and so any other bonds there that are not represented are necessarily bonded to hydrogen. Okay. That would represent a carbon chain. Another kind of structure that we see in organic molecules is a ring structure. So I've drawn in below a 6-sided ring, again representing a hydrocarbon molecule, and this would therefore be hexane. Hex representing 6 carbons. The ane ending is just telling us that there are only single covalent bonds in there, no double bonds. And At each corner of the hexagon, there'd be a carbon atom, which obviously is bonded to two other carbon atoms, one on either side of it. And so there's two more bonds for each one, which would therefore be hydrogens. And we're not going to draw on the hydrogens because they just take up a lot of space, but they are there. Now we will see other representations, and I said that hydrogens aren't drawn in. They will often be drawn in when they're part of something else. So if we think about the picture with the enzymes that I showed you a little bit ago, there is an OH sticking off of the two monomers, and that OH would be an oxygen and a hydrogen bound together. Again, oxygen hydrogens, polar bonds, carbon hydrogens are nonpolar bonds. Consider this question. When you feel that you've reached an answer, hit the next button to go into the next slide, which will reveal the correct answer.